In this video, we're going to take a look at the Practice AP Free Response question on a class called Recipients. Some of the concepts that we're going to review in the process of going through this are classes in general, how they work, how to use them, how to write a main method. Array lists are in here, and also we're going to have to create algorithms that traverse an array list in this particular case. These algorithms could also be applied to normal arrays as well. So here's the description of this class. You're going to write a class called Recipients that'll be used to process names and addresses from a mailing list. The lines in the mailing list are stored into an array list of string type objects, which will be the class variable in the recipients class. The first line for each recipient will store the name of the individual, and the next bunch of lines, it's usually either going to be 2 or 3 lines after the name, will contain the address. Then there's going to be a blank line, which is just an empty string, used to separate the individuals in the mailing list. The mailing list will always end with an empty string. So behind the last person, there's going to be a blank string. An example portion of the mailing list shown below is going to help illustrate how this works. Now, what we've got over here is the actual mailing list. We got Mr. J. Adams, 6 Elm Street, Ithaca, New York, 14850, blank space. And then the next person, their address, blank space. The next person, their address, and you can see down here, there's a blank space. Each one of these lines is a string object that is being stored in the array list, and these are the index numbers, so 0 through 12. I began writing the recipients class below, which has much of the implementation missing. So public class recipients, private array list of string type objects list. This will hold the mailing list that we're going to manipulate. There will need to be a constructor that you're going to write in part A, which will take an array list of string type objects as a parameter, and then the user is going to somehow assign values to that, and it comes back and becomes our list. Public string extract city, string city zip. We're going to pass in a string with the city and the zip code, and this is going to return the name of just the city part. Public void print all names. This is going to print a list of all the recipients' names to the console, 1 per line, extracting the names out of the mailing list. This method, public string get address, you tell me a name. It's going to try to find a match for that name, for that recipient, and then just print out their address. So we're going to do that in part D. And public static void main, and this is the main program. And I'm going to ask you to do some certain tasks for the main program in part E. So this is going to perform the main method and whatever I ask you to do in part E. Okay, so the first part to this question says that I want you to write the constructor for the recipients class that takes a parameter of type array list string type specified and assigns it to become the class variable list. So there's 2 different ways you could do this. Both of them are very simple. Remember that a constructor always needs to be named the same as the class. So the name for this method is going to be recipients, same as the class, no return type. It's going to take an array list of string type objects. I called it X, and X gets assigned into your class variable list. Remember, assignments always work from right to left. So the parameter they passed in should become the information that my class is holding. Now, some people like to call the name of their parameter the same as the name of the class variable it's going to become. The one thing you have to be careful of if you're going to do this, so if you're going to make the name of the parameter list, which is the same as your class variable name, you're going to have to use this dot list equals list. So my parameter list is going to be set into my class variable list. This is the correct way to do this. So either one of these would be fine as a constructor. So part B in this problem says to write the recipients class method called extract city that will return only the city portion of a string called city zip. So they're going to pass us in a string. You can assume that the city zip string will always consist of the city name first, followed by a comma, and then a blank space, followed by two capital letters for the state abbreviation, followed by a blank space, and then a 5-digit zip code for that city. So some examples of this method and what should come out of it. If I pass it Ithaca, New York, 14850, it should just return Ithaca. Glendale, California, 91203, we should just get Glendale. If we pass it New York, now this is the first one where the city is actually two words. New York, 10013, it should get New York returned. So the key here, this is a very common thing that they're going to ask you to do. You have to develop an algorithm for what is it important that this needs to look for. So the key here is wherever the city ends, there should be a comma. That's the key defining feature here. So what I'm going to do inside of this extract city method is I'm going to develop a code that looks for where the comma is. So int comma, you can call the variable name whatever you want. I called it comma because that's what I'm looking for, equals cityzip.index of comma. So this is going to find the index where the comma's at. And what I basically want to do is make a substring out of everything that came before that. Everything before that's the name of the city. So string city equals cityzip.substring 0, comma. Remember the way that substring works. It goes from the beginning index, including the beginning index, all the way up to, but not including, the second index. So it'll go up to where the comma is, but it won't include the comma. And then, of course, all I have to do is just return the string that I just created. That will just be the city, and that will produce the results I wanted. So part C of this code, they want you to write the recipients class method called printAllNames, which prints to the console all the names on the mailing list, one per line. So examples of results of calling this method on the mailing list that we had shown at the beginning of this problem. We had this is our mailing list. And if I call this method on this mailing list, it ought to extract the names. Mr. J. Adams, print it out to the screen. Jack P. Smith, print it out to the screen. Miss J.K. Rollins, print it out to the screen. So again, this is about coming up with an algorithm to process your way through an array list. We know that the first item in this list is going to be a name. And then we know that the rest of the names will follow a blank space. So that is what we have to use to develop our code. So here's what I did. The very first thing that I'm going to print out to the screen, system.println, because every one of these is going to be one per line. So we want to use print line, not print. We're going to do list.getZero. So we go into that array list, we extract the first item, which we know is going to be a name. Names come first. Print it out. Now I'm going to have to set up a for loop. It doesn't have to be a for loop, but it just made sense to me to use a for loop for this because I know I can get the size of this array list here. So for int index equals 1, semicolon, index is less than list.size minus 1. Now you might say, well, why list.size minus 1? I know the last space is going to be a blank, and I don't even want to bother looking at that. They told us that. If you didn't subtract a 1, I think it would still work okay. Anyways, we're going to increment by 1s on the index. And what I'm looking for here is, if list.getIndex, so if list.getIndex equals empty space, okay, so that'd be one of these blank lines, for example. We want a system.out.println list.get index plus 1. Now I remember. The reason why I did list.size minus 1 is we know that the last one is going to be blank. And if the last one is going to be blank, that would be a match right here on the very last index. The trouble is there is no index that would come afterwards. So if I don't subtract 1 right here, I'm going to get an array index out of bounds error. Make sure that you consider like the most difficult things to always consider are what happens at the ends. The middle part of this, processing through this, is very easy. Find a blank, get the next thing that'll be a name. But at the end of this, there's going to be a blank space, and there's nothing after that. So we have to account for that in our indexing of the for loop. Okay, the next part of this code that you have to write, part D, says write the recipient's class method getAddress, which returns only the address portion which belongs to the corresponding named individual. So they're going to send you in a name, and your job is to search through the mailing list to see if you can find that name. So the string should contain line breaks, like new lines in the appropriate places, including after the last line of the address, so that the address would print out properly. If the name is not found in the mailing list, this should return an empty string. So a couple of examples. Let's say this was my mailing list over here, and we said to look for Jack P. Smith. So I'm sending in the string Jack P. Smith, which we do have a match for right here. It should send me back Jack P. Smith's address, 12 Maple Way, Suite 321, Glendale, California, 91203. And they do actually want line breaks, new lines in the appropriate spaces. So they don't want this all in one line. So we want to use system.printlines. If I called this method and I asked them to search for Bob Frapples, there is no name in this mailing list of Bob Frapples, so it should return an empty string. So let's take a look at how to do this. This is how the method starts: public string getAddress string name. They send me in the name. So what I'm basically going to do here is I'm going to set up a string s and make it equal to an empty string. For int index 0, index is less than list.size index plus plus. So I'm going to go through every single string in this array list if name dot equals list dot get index. So I'm going to get the first item and check it against this name. I'm going to get the next item and check it against this name. I'm going to get the next item, check it against this name. I'm going to just keep doing that until I find one that's equal. Now, if I find a match, I'm going to create an integer called j and set it equal to 1. And what I want to do here, when you find the name, so Jack P. Smith, I found it here at this index location. This would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 at index 4. What I want to do then is I want to keep getting the consecutive lines after this until I see a blank space, because that would then represent the end of that address. So this is a nested loop situation. I'm going to keep searching till I find a match. Now, once I find a match, I've got to get all the lines of the address. So in here I have a while loop, because I'm not sure if the address is going to just be 2 lines or 3 lines or however many lines. So while not list.getIndex plus j equals blank space. So as long as the things that I keep getting are not blank spaces, I want to print them out. So inside of the while loop, I'm going to do s plus equals list.getIndex plus j, and then I'm going to concatenate on the back end of this a new line. And then I'm going to increment j. So when I found Jack P. Smith was a match for what I was looking for the first time, that was at index 4. I want to get what's on index 5. I want to get what's on index 6. I want to get what's on index 7 until I run into a blank space, and then I want this while loop to fail. So that means I would have a string now that contains all the next bunch of lines that come after Jack P. Smith with new line characters concatenated on the end of each. Now, what do we want to do if we don't find the name? Well, if you don't ever find the name, so if this if never finds a match, you would go through this entire loop and do nothing, and that means you're going to return s, which is a blank space, which is exactly what they wanted us to do in the case of Bob Frapples. So only when we find a match do we add on to this s variable string, and if we don't find a match, s is just a blank space. Lastly, in Part E, I want you to finish writing the main method for the recipients class, which performs the tasks that are detailed below. You can assume that the mailing list has been correctly added to array list Y according to the format previously discussed in this problem. This array list will contain names and addresses for all your relatives. So here are the 4 things that I want you to write code for. Number 1, I want you to create an object of the recipient's type called relatives that passes the already created array list Y. So if you look down here, I've already started this. Array list of string type Y equals new array list, open close braces. So this would be an empty array list that gets declared and instantiated, and its name is going to be Y. And here's where the user would enter in the mailing list. Maybe we would ask them to do a J-option pay and show input dialog, or maybe we're reading in from a file or something like that, whatever. This is not important. You are not required to write this. But what I want you to do is use this array list to create an object of the recipient's type called relatives. On the first line of code, this is about creating an object of your class. Class name was recipients. The name of your variable, they told you, should be called relatives. And then we have to run the constructor for this class. The constructor for this class has the name recipients, and it must be passed an array list that we have filled with strings, which is Y. And we have to ask for memory to do that. New. So recipients, relatives equals new recipients, passing it Y. Okay, second task. Call the method extractCity on the relatives object, passing the parameter Clarence, New York 14031. Be sure to print the name of the city to the console for viewing. So if you just run the method, it'll return a string, but if you don't print it out, it won't go anywhere. So this is what you should get for number 2 here. System.out.println, so this is me printing out, relatives.extractCity, and then you have to pass it the string that contains the city and zip. So this is just a matter of knowing how to run a method on a particular object, making sure that you're passing the right type of parameter. So extractCity needs a string, and relatives was the object of the class that we're going to run this on. Number 3, call the method printAllNames on the relatives object to print out the names of all your relatives. Okay, so all we have to do here is relatives.printAllNames. One of the reasons why you might ask, well, why don't we put a system.out.println in front of this? If you go back and look at the printAllNames method, it already is doing the system.out.printlns inside of that method. So you just have to run the method on the relatives object and it will print out all the names. Okay, last but not least, use the getAddress method to search for the address of your relative antenna. Be sure to print out the address that gets returned to the console for viewing. Now, if you go back to the getAddress method, it creates a string that contains the address for the match of whatever string you pass it in for the name of your relative, but this method doesn't print out, so we will have to do the printing out. System.out.println relatives.getAddress antenna. So we're passing in antenna, and we're going to get antenna's address from our relatives array list of string type variables. This method doesn't do the printing, so we have to do it over here, system.out.println. And that's it. I would definitely use this to help me get ready for that AP test, and check out all the different details that we did. A lot of algorithms in here, traversing array lists, checking out sizes for array lists, considering what happens at the ends. These are all things they're definitely going to ask you about.